Oh, nice.
It's already fading, isn't it? Because I got my hair back in like 2 weeks. We had some.
I've been on it.
It was great. It was not overcast, but we were still out. It was high 80s or low 90s. Yeah, it's great. Okay. Mom and Dad's on Christmas. 6 weeks.
Oh, okay.
This is what, I mean, I should go in and see him, which I have not been able to do because.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Pennsylvania Horse Racing Commission meeting. Very pleased to have you here. We had a brief executive session this morning with the commission. This meeting has been properly sunshine, so we're good there. Let's begin with just a round of introductions. Stephanie, please just lead off and we'll work around.
Maria Curran, counsel to the commission.
George Augusto, assistant counsel.
Now the fund, the commissioner.
Russell Jones, commissioner. John Nagel, commissioner.
Tom Ellis, commissioner. Tom Shukas, bureau director.
Russell Redding, chair.
Corinne Sweeney, commissioner.
Michelle Runny, commissioner.
Ed Rogers, commissioner.
Darrell Brenizer, commissioner.
Okay, again, thank you all for being here. To the commission, you have before you the November 28th meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to accept those minutes, please?
Second.
Commissioner Ellis on the motion, and Commissioner Sweeney on the second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Tracy, welcome. Can you give us an update on the financial report?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Secretary and Commissioners. Starting out with the racing fund balance for November 30th. The beginning cash balance was $7,174,000. Revenue was $1,738,000. Expenditures was $1,735,000. Ending cash balance was $7,177,000. Moving on to the commission, revenues for the month of November was $763,000. Personnel expenditures were $631,000. Operating expenditures were $117,000, bringing the total expenditures for the month to $749,000. There is a large balance in miscellaneous. That is because we have a delay in our P-card reconciliation for the month, so that should be distributed. In addition, the vehicle expenses for the month was also charged there, and that will be coded correctly next month. And then going forward, the change in coding the vehicles to go to testing has been completed. So although there's a large balance for this month in miscellaneous, that will be distributed next month. Moving on to testing, total racehorse development transfers for the month were $975,000. Personnel expenditures for the month were $597,000. Operating was $378,000. Bringing the total expenditures for the month to $975,000. I was asked to explain other specialized services, why there is a large budget amount of $3 million, but only an expenditure of $260,000 at this point. That is UPenn invoicing. That invoice is actually the final invoice for last year, and then we received this month four invoices to bring them current. So they will be posted in December, and then we'll be back up to where we should be with the payments for UPenn, and it won't look like such a drastic difference. The other one I was asked about is other rental and leases, which is lab equipment, and I will have to look in to verify that. I did just talk to Dr. Robinson briefly. It could be that that is way over budgeted because the lease payments have been completed. So I will report that next month to you. If that's the case, then that's largely over budgeted. So.
How was the lease payment?
It was I think it was a 3-year lease.
And you own it?
Yeah, I think it was a payment provision, a small payment provision.
It's a lease purchase.
Yes, it is lease purchase. So the equipment remains, but the payments no longer being made. And that was probably just an oversight on our part, not realizing that that is finalized this year. But I will definitely get back to you next month and let you know where we stand with that. Any other questions in regards to testing?
If I may just remind the commission that the big discrepancy between the budgeted amount for the other specialized services and the actual amount expended is directly a result of cash basis of accounting. Because with accrual basis, we would have all 5 of those monthly bills in there, not just one of them.
Correct.
If there's any way that we can go back to accrual, I would certainly encourage it.
Racehorse promotion, there was an advertising expenditure of $13,535. I do believe in following up with procurement and speaking with Tom that you'll see the agreements in place and money flowing out next month for your
If you remember last year, we did 5-year grants. This year required a business plan and the invoices. We've received business plans from all the organizations except one. That's all been filed and so on. And then when the invoices come, we can process. We just started getting some invoices from the breeders, so we're way ahead of schedule from last year.
And that's one entity, I don't know if the name has been notified that they get it.
Correct.
Why do we spend advertising money when we don't promotion? That's just a system application.
For advertising, the $13,000, I believe that's going to the farm show. I'll double check for you, but we have a booth at the farm show in conjunction with the stakeholders. They have their booth, we have ours next to them. We purchase bags and other things to give away and so on, and I think that's the lion's share of that cost, but I'll double check.
Thank you.
So are you just inquiring in regards to this month's purchases or the total amount spent year to date?
No, this month.
This month, okay. Okay, moving on to the comparison from November 2018 to November 2017. Revenue is pretty much on board. We're a little ahead in revenue, and that's because the Racehorse Development Fund transfer started earlier this year with the timely budget. Personnel's pretty much on schedule. Moving down to operating, currently we're a little underspent, and there again, that's largely because if you look at the large dollar amount of differences, is the UPenn contract, which like I said, next month you should see that catch up. And real estate being paid timely this year. Last year was not paid because of the budget delay or impasse. And then again, laboratory supplies is a little bit over budget from last year because of the passing of the budget on time. So supplies were being bought on a regular basis. But overall, the total expenditures are pretty much right in line with last year's. And then remaining is the restricted fund balances.
Any surprises in this budget?
No, other than if I can confirm the fact that we are not needing to make the rental payments, that would be a large overstatement in our budget, which is fine. That would work well for us as far as the transfers being limited. So I will get back to that, but no, we're doing well with the budget, and we're not exceeding it, and at this point looks like we may come in under budget, which is good.
The only comment is to kind of pick up on the cash basis one is that I would like at the end of the fiscal year not to be in that position. I think that the pen should get us that bill so we can actually deal with it on a cash basis at the end of the year, because that's going to throw off the whole year in terms of money we have. So during the year, it doesn't make much difference if they're 4 months behind, because eventually we catch up. But we should make an effort to make sure that that bill is here, and we do treat it, since we're on a cash basis, that we do treat it and pay it in this fiscal year if we can.
That's a couple things that transpired. They had a change in employment, a change in the person dealing with it. That's how they fell behind. Currently, I approved the last bill, which is through November, so they're current now. It just takes time to go through our system. As Tracy told you, come January, you should have 4 or 5 months in, and we're up to date from that point
And
on.
I think I just want to make sure we stay that way at the beginning of the year.
And we did last year. We only had one payment outstanding.
That's what you should have.
So that's what we should have. So the key component here with the cash basis accounting, the 2 items we have to watch and make sure that we're paying out before June 30th as much as we can is the UPenn contract and the promotional grants. That's a critical component too. So if we can just stay on top of them the second half of the year and coming into June 30th and try to get as much of that money out the door as we can prior to June 30th, that would be fantastic. Make my job a lot easier.
Okay, Tracy, thank you. Any final questions, comments for Tracy?
Thank you, Tracy, for all your work this year.
Thank you. Have a happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. So you have before you and presented, do we have a motion to accept the November financial report?
So moved.
Commissioner Rogers on the motion, Commissioner DeBund on the second. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the November financial report say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Tracy, thank you.
The next item on the agenda, last month, Jockey Tony Black and Dr. Vincent came and made a presentation on CTE and CTE protocol. The commission requested this month if Dr. Kelly Ryan would be kind enough to come up from Maryland. She is the key component in Maryland of implementing the CTE program. I think she's going to tell us exactly how it works in Maryland and answer your questions. And with her is Jockey Tony Black. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I just want to thank you for inviting me here today. Because while I'm in Pennsylvania today, and my jurisdiction is Maryland, this affects me a lot because it affects my job because it crosses the state line. The other thing is I would really appreciate it if I wasn't one of the only ones to be implementing this concussion protocol so it becomes more of a norm and less just Maryland's concussion protocol. And that's really the goal here because, unfortunately, we really need to make a culture change. I think that everyone else is making a culture change in every other sport, youth football, youth soccer. The NHL now has different protocols. I think that it's time that we start educating our riders because I go to a lot of different racetracks just because my new interest. I'm not from the racetrack initially. My background is primary care, and then I did specialty training in sports medicine, so I'm fellowship trained as a sports medicine physician. I take care of a college, I take care of kids in the office, I take care of anything from newborns all the way up to my oldest patient's 96 years old. So I run the whole gamut. It was kind of random that I ended up at the racetrack, but when I got there, I knew everything that I had learned from my fellowship, and I looked around and I was like, what is happening here? And I would go to different racetracks, and I had riders who were retired that would come to me and say, oh, I heard that you have a concussion protocol. Do you think that my head injuries might be contributing to my memory problems? Do you think that this is the reason that I'm having problems with my depression? Do you think that this is why this is happening to me? And one of the things that I think is the most important portion of this concussion protocol is being able to say, it's one thing if you make it an informed decision, but But if they don't know, and if they're not educated, then I think that we're doing them a disservice. So I think that we need to educate our riders, which is my biggest priority, is being able to help them to understand why head injuries are important. So many of them come off of a horse and it's just a regular thing for them, whereas every single time they come off the horse, I'm like running after them and making sure that they're okay. You know, to them, they just brush themselves off because this is what they're used to. But at least we can say we know a lot more about head injuries and we know a lot more about the long-term complications of head injuries. So one of the things I do want to just clarify briefly is on our agenda today, it says CTE protocol, and I caution you as this group to be careful not to confuse concussion protocol with the CTE protocol, because we really don't know that much about chronic traumatic encephalopathy yet, and right now we just want to make sure that we're managing acute head injuries at the time. So why else do we care? We care because having a rider who has a concussion, ride on a horse going 40 miles an hour, making very quick decisions that requires a lot of very important reaction time, and going there, riding like that is almost like allowing them to ride drunk. And I know that we don't like that. So the things that people think that they know about themselves when they have a concussion and what is actually happening in reality are two very different things. And that is the nature of the injury in itself. There are so many times that players have concussions. You can't turn on the television without reading about or learning about concussions today or hearing about it on the radio. And yet, there's still players and riders that fall, hit their head, don't feel right, and cannot recognize the fact that they have a concussion. And that's the concussion in itself. That's the injury. And the problem is with all their adrenaline going through their body and everything like that, of course they want to get back on the horse. But it's not just that they're putting themselves at risk, it's that they're putting all those other riders, all those other horses at risk. And like I said, we know too much now to not do anything about it. So in terms of how we do it in Maryland, we have a physician who's at the track every single day. We get there about an hour ahead of time. And we not only take care of the riders, but we also take care of the backstretch employees. So we have any kind of injury clinic. We do a lot of their primary care medicine as well. But so my day starts, I get there an hour ahead of time. I go to the jocks room, say, oh, does anybody have any injuries? Because I know that some of them go to other racetracks that don't have medical care. So I make sure that they didn't have any falls in the morning, that they didn't have any falls at the racetrack that they were at before. Even if it's just an ankle sprain, I'll help them with that. Make sure everybody's okay. If there's any new riders who are there who are not part of our colony, they have to complete our medical paperwork in case they were to go down or be unconscious. They can't speak for themselves. I want to have that information. The other thing that we do is for new jockeys, we do the pre-participation physical, which now includes baseline SCAT-5 concussion testing, which is it's actually really the gold standard. Baseline concussion testing is not necessarily gold standard for everyone because there's a lot of debate about it. As a physician who takes care of concussions all the time, I don't need a baseline concussion test to be able to determine whether or not a rider has one. But in a court or if there was debate, I would have something to compare it to. And so it actually saves the industry and would help you guys out to have something to show the rider, look, this is what you were like before, this is what you are like now, and then you can say, okay, that makes sense. Again, I think that that's an important part, and you can just add that to your pre-participation physical that they get every single year.
Here's a question. Is that baseline report mandated by the commission in Maryland, or is this something that you do as part of the initiation of the new job?
So in Maryland, we do them every year. This will be our third year coming up starting.
My question is there something that's required by the Racing Commission in Maryland?
Yes.
Is it something that you just did?
No, it's required. It's required for our colonies and for the new for jockeys when they get their license, they have to have their physicals through us. And we work with Mike Hopkins, my stewards. They pretty much just say we trust you, and we keep them up to date with what we're doing, but they leave the medical decisions to us. So we would do their baseline SCAT-5 concussion testing, which is also used. The SCAT-5 is really just, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this and probably might not even necessarily really understand what it is. It's a symptom checklist which says, I feel these symptoms, and then you would have the balance test, you have a memory test, a cognition test, and then you would also have, like I said, a memory test. And so a combination of all of those things helps us to make a diagnosis of concussion. The thing that I like about the SCAT-5 baseline is not necessarily that I use it to compare it all the time, but it's 10 minutes that I have with the rider where I say, if you have a concussion, if you fall, you might feel this. And they say, oh yeah, I think I probably have had 10 concussions before, or something like that. But that is one-on-one time that you get to educate your rider. And that's my biggest argument for SCAT-5 baseline concussion testing. And that's why I like baselines. So after we do their baseline concussion testing, and I go back to my office, I'm usually trying to be outside for all the races. If a rider goes down, I get there as soon as I can. Even if a rider just pops off of a horse, I will go back to the jocks room after that race, and they have to be seen before they're allowed to ride again. If they refuse to be seen, then they're not allowed to ride. We go through a series.
If they fall or have something like, they have to be cleared by you?
Yes.
They can't make the decision themselves?
No. No. My stewards support us. And so does my commission. So anytime a jockey comes off of the horse during a race day, they have to be evaluated at least face-to-face so I can talk to them. I might not necessarily go through the entire SCAT-5 baseline, the entire SCAT-5 evaluation, just because it might not be necessary to do that for every single one of them. And that's just a physician's choice. So after that, if I do suspect a concussion, then they're removed from the rest of the races. We give them instructions of what to look for when they go home in case their symptoms get worse and they might need to possibly go to the emergency department, because that's one of my concerns as well, is that if someone were to have a traumatic brain injury and they say, oh, well, I think that I just have a concussion, and then something were to happen later on that day, you have to make sure that they're informed in case, because we're not just talking about bumping heads with another football player, we're talking about coming off of a horse, which is a much more significant trauma, so you also have to counsel on hemorrhaging and things like that. So we give them instructions to go home, we make sure that they don't go home by themselves, we make sure that someone who goes home with them is aware of these symptoms, and then that way they can go to the hospital if they need to. And then the next day they're required to be seen again before they go back to ride. 20% of concussions are missed on the first day, and not everybody who falls and hits their head and has a headache has a concussion. And so that's the thing that we also want to prevent, is by pulling off every single rider that comes off of a horse for the next 5 to 7 days, because we think that they have a concussion and they might not necessarily really be suffering from one. Regardless of that, second impact syndrome, which is when you get hit a second time in the head without actually recovering from the first injury, is significant enough that I usually counsel my riders and they don't usually argue with me. I've had pushback after I started this. A lot of people say, well, the jockeys aren't going to agree with you, and they're going to argue and things like that. I've had one pushback, and that wasn't even from a jockey, that was from an agent. And if you talk to these guys, it's out there enough. A lot of these guys, especially when they're younger, they've grown up in a world of concussions, which is how I grew up. In my medical school training, that was part of my training. So this is all that I know. And so for a lot of these riders, they see this in the NFL, they see it in the NHL, and so they're more aware of it than our riders were, many years ago. So I haven't really gotten much pushback from the jockeys. They all think that I ask them too many questions, and they think that I make them do silly things by testing their balance and by asking them these funny memory things, and we kind of laugh about it. But at the end of the day, they know they're protected, and they know that I think they all appreciate it. And actually, I'm speaking at a youth sport conference tonight for parents, and one of my jockeys who suffered a very severe head injury is actually coming to talk to the parents about how she felt that she had been recovered, and it wasn't until later on that she realized how bad she was. And again, that's just the nature of the injury in itself. Questions?
Very good, yeah, questions, comments?
I have a couple questions. So that, so now you determine someone had a concussion, and they have to go back the next day. What happens after that?
Oh, okay, so, thank you for asking that. So we have developed what's called a return to ride protocol. So that is based off of, I'm not making this stuff up, by the way. I wish that I was that smart. I'm just creative. So a whole group of the smartest people in the entire world came up and put together the consensus statement on concussions, and they meet every 2 years. And actually, the reason that I have learned so much about this is also from the former British Horse Racing Association Medical Director, Michael Turner, who does a lot of concussion work. And so what we do is we just went off of the guidelines for every other sport, but we had to be a little bit creative because for a field athlete, you would have them do a little bit of light exercise, like running. Once they're symptom-free, then you can start the return to ride protocol or the return to play protocol. So you would exercise them a little bit to get their heart rate up. Sometimes when patients have concussions, they might feel better, but until you get them exercising, get their blood flow, get their blood pressure increased, you might not necessarily know that you might still have some symptoms. So we stepwise progress them. So the first step would be just light exercise. The second step would be a little bit more exercise, maybe jumping, maneuvering, things like that.
Do they have to be cleared by you to go back to racing?
At the end. So we do a stepwise protocol, and I can send this to you. Then we put them back on the equisizer. So we put them back on the equisizer so that they're not actually at risk. If you even sit on a horse, some of my worst concussions I've even seen have been when someone got head-butted by a horse, which is totally no injury for me. But it can happen just from sitting even on a very mild horse. So that's why we implemented, there is a buffalo concussion treadmill test that's done by the leaders in the country, and we reproduce that similar with the equisizer so that it's like they're actually working out. And then we have to see them again, and we have to reevaluate them with one more test before they're allowed to get back on the horse.
So what I'm trying to get to is they can't go back to racing without somebody signing off on it.
No, they have to be cleared by us.
And that's, again, is that by commission?
Yes.
Or this protocol? If the commission requires that in Maryland?
Yes, we have our own Maryland concussion protocol.
Okay.
Let me ask a question.
Sure.
In Maryland, does the Maryland Jockey Club run the program? Is it run through MedStar? And then, let me ask it this way.
We're
Jockey Club
contracted.
hires MedStar.
Yes, that's correct.
And MedStar runs all the medical programs at Laurel and Pimlico.
Yes.
Okay. So when you talk about the concussion protocols and so forth, I understand that the commission supports it and so on. Is everything basically run through the track and the commission, or just the commission?
That question I would have to ask the stewards. Ultimately, if the stewards wanted to say that a rider could ride, they could overrule us, but they told us that they would not because they contracted us. It's just like how the NFL is.
Okay. I'll follow up with Mike.
Yeah, and we can't be involved. Sports medicine physicians should not be involved and should not actually be they should not be part of the track. We're not part of the track because then that would be a conflict of interest. So my medical opinion has to be separated.
Okay. The other question I have is that, fine, so now Tony Black has a concussion. He has to get your clearance to go back. But he says, wait a minute, I can go up to Delaware.
He could.
Okay. Do we pass that information along to other jurisdictions so that they know that Tony had a concussion at Maryland? Does Delaware somehow know, or does somebody else know, so that he can't go and say, well, I know I can't go over there, but I can go over to Delaware, right?
So that's why I'm here.
Maryland only has one track running at a time.
Correct.
Pennsylvania does not. So we could have this situation where Parks, he has a concussion at Parks, he can go to Penn National.
I mean, part of the problem with this, and I don't mean to project that terrain, is Maryland is solely the program right now. Delaware has talked about it. I don't know how far they've gotten. We're discussing it here. The only way this works in the Mid-Atlantic is if all the states buy in. Then you'll set up a protocol where Dr. Ryan will contact whoever the doctor is at the parks, will contact the doctor at Penn, and so on. I think Maryland is on the front end of this, and this commission is looking at becoming probably the second one in the group, correct?
So that would be excellent, and again, that's why I'm here. So I can tell you about, this is not new to me. So what I do is I actually stalk I don't want to say stalk, but there are great apps for horse racing. And so what I do is when I have a rider that I have a suspected head injury, I will follow them and I will look up where their next mounts are. I tell them where their next mounts are, and I tell them that they're not allowed to ride that I suggest that they do not ride at their next mounts. Myself, Dr. Chinichi, who's at Monmouth, I've spoken with him. He's actually sent me a rider who he was concerned about a specific head injury. He called me up, has said, hey, my rider's coming to see you, can you evaluate them? I said, absolutely. We had a rider in Delaware. They said, hey, we have a rider, can we send them to you? Will you evaluate them? Absolutely. And so that's really one of the things that we're working. We're also trying to get this from Encompass because there's a vets list, right? There's a list where the horses, you know, if they have an injury that they're not allowed to race. Well, we're trying to work with Encompass to create the same thing, where if a jockey comes off of a horse, that they're at least flagged. Whether or not they have an injury, it's going to be hard to determine, but at least if they have to get some sort of doctor's note that says that they were evaluated by a physician before they're allowed to go back to riding.
How do you overcome the HIPAA issues?
So,
If you're exchanging information, medical information between non-related individuals on a patient.
So you don't necessarily have to go into their information, and for the most part, and it's part of their medical care. So that doesn't necessarily completely apply. And so in terms of so that's why Encompass is tough, right? Because vets, it's different for horses than for people. So you just have, that's why by saying you would just say that the jockey came off of a horse, you don't actually divulge that specific type of information. And for us, when we have them sign their pre-participation physicals, they also have a release of records in case we would ever have to get medical information from the hospital that they go to. We already have that available. And once they see us and we do their physical, then we've established a medical relationship with them.
Other questions?
I just want to make two other comments. I had Tom give out an article that appeared in the racing forum that kind of follows up on my question to Mr. Black last time about whether the jockeys, and it's an article that says Velasquez, and it basically said it was brought up at the Jockey Guild meeting in Las Vegas, and it seems like the jockeys are now getting on board on this, so I was glad to see that. And the other thing I just want to say is that I recently found out that Tony, you rode your last race a month ago, is that correct? And your age? Talk about having a brain problem. 67 years old, he just runs, and he's still riding horses.
So do you have physicians at all of your tracks? Do you have a physician at every track?
We do. Mike Valesi can answer that question.
Yes.
Dr. Wright? Yes.
So, I mean, you guys are in a perfect position for this, whereas some of them don't even have, they don't have any medical personnel at the racetrack.
I don't think there would be any problem when it comes to overload and passing word on to another track with this jockey.
Tony, can you,
Particular track.
yeah, you use that microphone.
I don't think there would be any problem passing when it comes to the HIPAA laws, that a jock has been banned from riding at a track where an accident occurred and he's been diagnosed. We're not going into Health Information Privacy Act. We're just saying he's not permitted to ride because of an accident that occurred at Philadelphia Park's racetrack. So I don't think that would have any bearing on the HIPAA laws.
Very good, thank you.
Promise me you won't ride past the 70.
I'm going to ride in 70. I'm the oldest rider to win a race in race of 70. I started in 1970 and I'm going to ride in 70.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, a couple of points. I'll just say that thanks for the clarification on the use of CTE protocol versus concussion. That's important terminology difference. And I guess just you have the benefit of the pre-participation physical being, you do that and then incorporate the baseline, right? I don't know how common that is. We're not doing the baseline now, but in terms of the pre-participation physical, is that done? No. Okay. So uniqueness
So
in there.
horses get physicals every day before they ride. And so this isn't just for concussion purposes, but it's also to try to prevent sudden cardiac death. So like we do for any of our children. And so we actually reproduce a specific sports physical because these guys shouldn't just be getting any type of physical, they're athletes.
I came about when there was no physical required, all you had to do was fill out a license application. We get physicals at parks, we get physicals in New York, physicals in Maryland, and it should be the medical expertise that gives us physical and the guidelines of that physical set by them, the experts, the medical experts.
And then one last thing also, I previously spoke last year in Dubai at the International Jockey Safety and Welfare Summit. And so the physicians that take care of jockeys from around the world all got together. United States is pretty much well known for being about 10 years behind the rest of the world in that area. I actually presented on our concussion protocol and our return to ride protocol, and they were actually rather impressed with what we were doing. But we all sat together in a room and we updated what's called Article 27, which is in order to get your licensure for medical purposes, you have to have all these things to be able to be cleared. And we updated that to include that racetracks should all have some type of concussion protocol, no matter what it specifically is. And the ARCI also recently added that back in December, back in with Arizona, that they recently updated that every racetrack should have a concussion protocol.
Very good. Yeah, Dr. Ryan, thank you. Mr. Black, thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming up from Maryland to brief us and give us some great insight on the concussion protocol. Thank you.
Thank you for this information, for listening to us. I want to thank Dr. Ryan for coming.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda, back in the fall, the Commission directed Del Val to do an economic study on horse racing. Dr. John Herberchek is here to make a brief presentation and answer your questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, Commissioners. I'm delighted to be here today to give you an overview of the results of the study we did that looked at the impact of the horse racing industry on the economy of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Our study really had two primary focuses, if you will. I'm going to talk about the economic component of this today, but the Commission also asked us to take a look at a comparison of Pennsylvania and other major racing states with regard to polling, testing, and after-care practices. Our report summarizes that. I'm not going to talk about those things. I'm the economist, the numbers guy, if you will, and my equine people did a superb job in taking a look at where the Commonwealth stood with regard to those issues. And I think the findings were that we're really in actually pretty good shape. What we did, however, was we sat down and we took a look at the industry within the Commonwealth and tried to get an idea successfully of what the impact of that industry is on the economy. And when you look at this from an economic perspective, the way that you approach that is to take a look at what the members of the industry spend. Because the dollars that are spent within the industry circulate throughout the economy. They generate additional economic activity, which supports gross domestic product at the state level. It generates household income, it generates corporate or proprietary income. It supports the creation of jobs and the maintenance of those jobs. And then it also generates income for not only the state, but also the localities where the facilities are located. And as you know, we've got quite a large and diverse racing industry, 3 thoroughbred tracks, 3 standardbred tracks, 15 fairs that offer harness racing. We've got equine organizations, trade associations, trade organizations at the tracks and elsewhere that are involved in the industry. And of course, the commission activities itself, and we've tried to make sure that we we reflected what you guys do in terms of spending in different areas in that economic activity. We used an economic impact multiplier model to do this. It's a firm called Implant, IMPLAN, that produces models for each of the states of the United States, and actually we take it down to county level. It's based on the input-output model of the U.S. economy, and basically traces through the flow of those dollars as they go, so that if every dollar that you spend, whether you're a racetrack and you're spending money on improving your track or you're building another facility, those dollars are spent by buying things. So what we were trying to do was to measure how many of those dollars were spent in Pennsylvania and what the impact of those was. So what we did was we developed a questionnaire that was sent via email. We solicited via email. The firm is called SurveyMonkey. It's widely used and widely respected. A good way to get information. We developed a 21 questionnaire that basically solicited information about how many equine did you have, where were you located, how much do you spend in Pennsylvania by certain categories, and we tried to be as specific about those categories as we could. When we got that information back, we were able to aggregate that and get an idea by each of the components.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Being a breeder in the state of Pennsylvania, I never received one of those surveys that I know of. And I'm just wondering about how many surveys were sent out, how many responses you had, and then since I didn't receive one, and I breed quite a few number of horses in Pennsylvania and so on, I'm just wondering how accurate it was.
Very good question. The population base that we used for the survey was the list of licenses the Pennsylvania Racing Commission issues, and I think it was as of June of 2018. I think the numbers are approximate. I don't remember the exact number, but roughly about 10,500 licenses were active at that point. We selected from those the licensees that had active email accounts. We were doing an online survey. That brought it down to about 6,500 or so that had active email addresses. We netted out ones where we got a lot of responses back where the email was no longer active, and I think there was 134 people that we contacted that declined to participate. So the net base that we had was about 5,500 surveys that were actually circulated. Now, in addition, we contacted each of the states, each of the tracks and each of the fairs to do that as well. And then we also approached each of the associations, breeders' associations, horsemen's associations, and asked them to also circulate the link to the survey as well. So we felt it was better to get somebody approached 3 times than not at all. I can't address why one individual person did or did not get it. That's the approach that we got. We did, as I said, we sent out about 5,500 or 5,600 solicitations, and we sent them to the active email addresses along with a letter of introduction from the commission, basically explained what we were doing and asked their participation in the survey. We got back 671 surveys with useful information. It gives us about a 12% response rate. Now, in the world of surveys, we chose to do an online survey because the response rates tend to be better. On mail surveys, for example, have a response rate somewhere in the area of 5 to 7%. Our survey response rate is about 12%. To achieve a 95% significance and 5% error, we needed only 357 surveys to be returned, and we got more than double that amount. So we feel fairly comfortable about the information that we got and our ability to expand that up full population. I hope that answers your question. Again, I can't apologize why you didn't get it. I sure would have loved to have your participation. The more information we get, the better we got. But from a statistical perspective, we had a good enough base, solid enough base on which to base our conclusions.
Well, some of the some of the size of operations in Pennsylvania are so diverse. Some of them are so much larger than others and spend so much more money and employ so many more people. I would just think it would be critical to make sure at least you got information on those. In other words, say, for example, if the Hanover Shoe Farm would have happened to have been left out of the survey and not respond, then the survey virtually has got a big hole in it.
Right, we were aware it turns out that's one that we were specifically aware of. We have a relationship so well with Hanover Shoe, and I know the people there myself very well. So that was one we made sure, because of their size and importance, that was specifically included in this. We did the best we could with the information that we could. Now, again, everything that we got back was anonymous. So we got anonymous responses. I can't go back into my database of responses and say who responded and who didn't, other than to say that I know who the tracks were and who the fairs were. But aside from that, we asked people what their primary activities were, and we got a number of people that were involved in a number of different activities. So we broke it into the tracks, to the fairs, the associations and government, and then we lumped everybody else together, owners, traders, breeders, all into one group, because we were really not effectively able to segregate that.
There were sales companies included?
Say again?
Sales companies.
Sales companies?
Yes.
No, I don't believe they were.
Consider the fact that the Harrisburg sale in November, there was $53 million worth of horses sold there.
What we did, one of the questions that we asked was sources of income. So we tried to capture the revenue from those sales in a different way. And again, what we're trying to do is to capture how much of that income was derived and stayed here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, so that if somebody from Ontario came down here, bought a horse and took it back to Ontario, the impact of that in Pennsylvania is relatively low.
Not if you bought a $100,000 horse, it's not from a Pennsylvania breeder.
No, it isn't, but we asked, what we did do is we asked people who were involved in breeding what their income from sales of equine was. So we thought this through pretty carefully to try and answer most of the issues that you've addressed. We did have the survey reviewed by the commission before we went out and did that, and of course we made changes as we went through, because people would come through. The big one was location. We sent this out to like 5,700 to 5,600 people, not all of whom are Pennsylvania residents. So they would write back and say, well, I live in Ontario. And we went back and said, that's great, nice place. We want to know what you're spending here in Pennsylvania. And that was the emphasis. So we tried to get as much information about what the expenditures were and what the revenue was specifically in Pennsylvania. So that was the approach that we took with regard to this. What we found, what we determined as the consequence of this is that the industry participants spend about $722 million on wages, goods and services, capital expansion, improvements, and all those activities in the Commonwealth. Now that's expenditure, okay? That's what we're spending on things, and those are the dollars that circulate through. Income that comes from like sales of horses, equine sales, that's income that is reflected. That then circulates as well, but not in the same way that the direct expenditures do. So we have about $722 million worth of expenditures. The larger share of that, as you might expect, is in the area of capital improvements and capital expansion. And that was an important component of that. But it was not exclusively for that alone.
I'm sorry,
the second largest
can I interject a question here? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
When you say the 723 million, was that only from the people who responded, or was that you projecting out?
That was based on the responses that we got, and that was then projected to the entire.
So if you got 12% response, you basically.
Well, don't do it on the basis of the responses. The basis of the response, 12%, told us that we got a there were two parts of it. One, we got a significant enough response rate. If we'd gotten 3%, that wouldn't have been so good. Then we looked at, within regard to what we needed in terms of sample size, in order to be confident about expanding the results to the entire population. We use that entire population of the 10,000 and 500 something. So that's how we expanded that.
So it's a projection based on the responses you have over what you thought it would be?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Because again, I'm an owner breeder. I didn't get a survey either. I did get one from my horseman's organization. So, but I didn't get either one.
But you did get, you were approached, right?
Yes, but I was not. If I hadn't gotten it from the horseman's association, I would have not gotten a survey because I didn't get one as an owner or as a breeder.
That's why we asked.
When you said license, I'm a licensed owner in Pennsylvania. I did not get a survey.
You got one from us because we sent out.
I said that, no, I said I got them from the different associations. What I'm saying is, if I didn't do that, I'm just wondering how many people didn't get them from the association, didn't get them at all. Because I'm an owner breeder.
Yeah, I think they spent a lot of time trying to figure out who got money. And as I listened to Dr. Richard, I mean, I think they made an honest attempt to try to take the universal licensees, put them out, active, gave everybody an opportunity who was at least an active email. That's not a guarantee, but you have an
I'm
opportunity.
an owner and I have a license, I'm an active email, and I didn't get one.
But you did get one, you got it through the association.
Yeah.
And so our fail-safe in that case worked. Now let me ask you, did you respond?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's important. So,
And that's the important thing. So what you're doing is you're justifying the way we approach it. We knew that there were going to people would get there. We knew we were going to miss some people.
Does it make a difference if I responded twice? No.
No, and that we would have, that the protocol was set up so that people could not respond more than once.
I'm only kidding.
Well, no, that's an important factor to keep in mind. Though we did the best we could based on the way that these things are run, based on the protocol.
There's a reason I'm asking the question. I'm not just trying to.
No?
We have put out to the industry in the past, the horse racing industry, that we have 23,000 jobs and we have a $2.1 billion impact. Your numbers don't seem to support either one of those numbers, and that's why I'm raising the issue. How accurate it is.
I came up with a total of 16,000 jobs, a little less than 16,000 jobs. An impact on the Commonwealth economy of $806 million GDP. And household income just a little less.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it's different from what has been circulated.
And I have seen previous studies that have been done. We've reviewed them pretty carefully. And what I can't do is I can't duplicate how they came up with their numbers. I don't know where their sources of information were. And I've had this discussion. I don't know on what basis those numbers were derived. I can tell you the basis on which we derived our numbers. I'm confident about the numbers that we've got in terms of jobs and in terms of income. And I will tell you that it's significant. It is not an insignificant industry, and it's one that obviously the Commonwealth should be very, very proud of and should work very, very aggressively to expand on the basis of the work that we've done.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if you're the person that can answer this, but what is going to happen to this information? Where is it going to be disseminated to, and how can we utilize this?
No, I'm not the person. That is really the Commission's decision. And I've done a lot of these over the years for a lot of different industries, and I'd be delighted to work with you guys and give you some suggestions. Typically, this information is used in a number of ways. Obviously, it's used to communicate to lawmakers, to legislators, how important the industry is, and if you'll pardon my French here, don't screw with us, all right? And we find that to be, that happens a fair amount. So that people they will do things they don't think through the consequences of. But that's particularly important at the local level with zoning laws, that sort of thing. That's one way. The other thing, obviously, is to communicate to the stakeholders in the industry who get a better appreciation for what they receive, and then finally to the population at large, so that they understand the importance of this. mean, people drive around, they look at pastures and pretty horses, and they don't think about, that's a real business, and it makes a real significant contribution. The other thing that we did ask is that we wanted to get an idea of how much open space, how much land is devoted to or really dependent on the racing industry. We came up with a number of about 67,000 acres in the Commonwealth. 29,000 of those acres are facilities related, and 38,000 are pastures and equine related crops. And that's an important factor because if that land stays in equine, in agriculture, it doesn't get developed, and we don't use that.
Just behind you, John, Brian had a comment.
Yes, just to answer Commissioner Bernheiser's question, the PHRA right now is in the process of taking in information, or very shortly taking the information from the Del Val study and putting it in a brochure and a card, which can be handed out at different events, etc. So just to answer your question.
I think it's important that our people in the industry do that because, like you said, it's important that it even gets out to the general public so that they know the impact of our business on Pennsylvania.
In my opinion, humble as it is, I think the general population is probably the most important audience you've got.
I'll just say, John, thank you to the Del Val team. You know, I looked at a couple of the tables, and admittedly I haven't read all of this, but I appreciate particularly the expenditure by category. So when you look at tracks, and you look at owners, and you look at breeders, and the government and trade associations, and the same with the impact by those same categories, to include fair. So it gives us a level of detail that, at least in most of our studies, we have not had access to. And with any study, you are better informed, and you can inform the narrative about what the industry actually produces and its impact on the Commonwealth. And I think that's here. Ideally, you would have 5,500 responses, right?
We had 671 responses on a base of 5,500.
Yeah, I'm just saying, in a perfect world, everybody who received the survey would respond to you.
I would have been delighted if all 10,500 would have.
Yeah, but you didn't get that, right? So you've done a good job at 12% response. But thank you, thanks for the insight. Any further comments?
Yeah. Got my contact.
Mr. Brenheiser? Yes.
Is there any way we can get a comparison and how that relates to the whole ag sector, compared to, say, dairy, beef, etc.?
The short answer is yes. I look to Deputy Secretary Cheryl Cook, who probably can speak to that. The question is sort of relative, the equine industry relative to other sectors of Pennsylvania's agricultural economy.
Yeah, I think you could argue that dairy is still somewhat larger than equine. Of course, the total number was 137 billion for all of agriculture. So unfortunately, dairy is the largest per capita.
I think I would just add that we did the economic impact analysis for PA agriculture, have a better idea of what those, what is in that definition of what is agriculture, but also the breakout. I don't know whether we have the sector comparisons, but yeah. John?
The only thing I would caution is this is just one component of the equine sector, albeit a large component, but there's a lot else to equine. So I think when you added this to the rest of the equine, I think it's going to challenge dairy as an industry, and it's also one that's growing, which is an important component as well.
Thank you. Final comments? Tom, any?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Everybody have a Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Very nice job. Thanks, John.
Next up is the PTHA's cleaning rule modification request. Mr. Belezzi had contacted me. He would like the commission to hear him on the claiming matter. I've advised him to take it under advisement and get back to you next month. You're on, Michael.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Commission. I'm Michael Belezzi, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Horse Association. With me today is Secretary, our new Secretary of Parks.
Kojanek. I'm the new director of racing at Parks Racing. Been on board there for 2 months, and Mike asked me to come up, possibly answer any questions regarding the changes to the claiming rule he's bringing before you.
David had come to me and asked you about if we could consider a change in the claiming rule. So the parts of each year see a modification to the existing claiming rule. Currently, the rule is for horses claimed for a period of 30 days, the horse is in jail. That is, he tends to run back for a price 25% higher than the original claiming price. What we're suggesting is that what we modify as follows, that the time in the jail period be reduced to 30 days. That is, strike that, 20 days. That is, on the 21st day, the horse is free to run and he's out of jail. We believe that will serve two purposes. Number one, it will create the availability for the horse to be back in the system to be used for additional races, or more horse will be available to the secretary. And number two, we implemented a rule where if the claim is bad, if the horse is delayed or cart off the track, or anyway shows that he's not suitable for racing, that claim is void. So we have that protection also. So we request that the rule be modified.
Comments?
I was going to like David, explain why you also support this.
Okay, yes. I've had horsemen that have come up to me and asked me, as a 30-day period is somewhat a long time period before they can run the horse back at the same level, before they can run the horse back at the same level they claim the horse at. At parks, the horses race back usually, the less expensive horses race back usually within about 3 weeks time frame from when they last ran. If the horse that come up to you did ask if they were able to run the horse back for the same price on the 21st day, would give them a better shot of trying to, if the horse is not performing well, it could be a lesser competition. So if you train the horse for $10,000 on the 21st day, they could run the horse back for $10,000. It puts the trainer in a tough position if they have to wait 30 days or 30 days, more than 30 days, because they may miss a race in the condition book that would fit the horse to run at the same price. So the horse could, sometimes with the current rule, before the horse could run back for the same price or less, the horse would have to, stay in the barn for over 30 days. 30 days amounts to average day rate with, full vet bills and blacksmith would be about $100 a day per horse, so it's about $3,000 to upkeep the horse. So they were asking me to petition for a 20-day jail time, but claiming race. It would help them out. It would also help us out in the racing office. We do the pre-race inspections of the horses, so I think it should be fine.
May I ask a question?
Please.
Is this going to be a request consistent across all of the racetracks, or is this because we have one commission regulation that applies to all racetracks, is this a uniform, consistent application?
What we wanted to do is the house rule, but we were told we could not do the house rule, that would be a rule.
Right.
So we're speaking for parks, obviously, Todd Hostow, you can speak for Penn National, and the rest of the folks that do themselves, but right now it's for parks, and for the rest, that's fine.
In terms of the 30 days, historically, we've always heard that, in fact, the commission reg is 30 days, and for many decades, racetracks have actually had a house rule that was longer than 30 days. What's the difference? What's changed from that? I'm sorry?
We've never had a house rule in 30 days.
I'm saying you may not have had, but other racetracks have.
Well, as David said, one of the main reasons is the economic benefit of having a horse available in 20 days. The horse is ready to run back in 21 days, 3 weeks. Why do we artificially stop the horse from running back for a price that he's competitive at and force him to run at a higher price, which in fact can be harmful to the horse? Today we have competition for races for horses. There's nothing, we have trouble filling races. This is another opportunity for the racing secretary to have a horse who's fit and ready to go, there's no harm
That's okay. I think the commission would like to hear from either Penn National or Todd, Eric, either one of you gentlemen have comments on this.
Can I stand?
You can stand, I think.
George, first to address your issue. The jail rule is for a horse has to run at that racetrack. Mike is specifically saying the mandatory 25% raise.
Right.
You are accurate that there has, some are 60 days, you have to race the racetrack or into the meet for those that have meets.
Correct.
In today's world of small foal crops, we are dealing with an issue that has created the problem that Mike's referring to as far as when we had 34,000 foal crop, we had spots, you could claim a horse for 5, the race for 62.50 would go, you had a spot to race. Now with the smaller foal crops, it creates a scenario whereby which you either have to run for 5 or jump all the way to 10 where your horse isn't going to be competitive. And the idea behind what Mike is saying is now that we have pre-race inspections, that deals with a lot of the issues that not forcing a horse to race previously deals with, because we are looking at every horse before that horse participates, and if that horse is off, that horse will not participate. So it's a situation where, because of the dynamics of the foal crop, in addition to the other safety protocols that we put in place, Mike's feeling is that we should be allowed to run that horse back on the 21st day for the same price. I have not addressed the issue with our board. I can tell you in the past, our board believes that if you make an investment in a horse as a revenue producing asset, and if I buy that horse for $5,000, nobody should tell me where I can run that horse. That's the opinion, that's been the previous opinion. I just had a recent election. I don't know what the opinion of this board would be. I would guess it would mirror that. In much the same instance, if you buy Google stock at 1,000, there's nothing that says, well, you have to hold that stock until it's 1,200. If you're buying a revenue-producing asset, you should be able to race that horse where you feel that horse is competitive for you to produce revenues by the purchase of that horse. But again, I want to quantify that because I have a new board and I can't tell you what my current board's opinion is, but I would guess it would mirror that thought.
What's magical about 30 or 20?
I don't think it is magical. I think the 30 days was originally, usually condition books are written on 14-day schedules. That race, particular race, should show up every 14 days. So it would force a horse to wait the 30 days if you wanted to run back for the same price.
Thanks, Eric.
I really don't have a strong feeling one way or the other as to whether you had a jail time there or not. The one thing, though, historically, that jail time was put into place for was to protect the guy that ran the horse. If you got a horse that's worth $15,000 and that race is not filling out of meat, so if somebody gets stuck, has to drop that horse in for, say, 12.5, the person that's claiming that horse has to think about it before he claims it, because there's no opportunity for that guy to run that horse back as well. Now, if he wants to take it and sit on the horse for 30 days, that's his prerogative. But that's something that was a consideration. Frankly, one way or the other, it does affect us. And Todd pointed out that if you claim the horse back, if it comes back, if you lose for 12.5 and the guy runs back for 12, you can get it back if you want to. But that was one of the origins of the rule originally.
Thank you, Eric.
Excuse me. One of the things we haven't considered here is the fact that the jail rule did something else too. If I claim a horse in Kentucky, I may have to wait 30 days before I can ship it up here or to the end of the meet. If I have a 20-day here, that means they can move it, they can take the horse here and move it to another jurisdiction after the 20 days.
No.
Well, you can move the horse anytime you want, you just can't run it. Yeah, but you could run it after on the 21st day somewhere else. But you can take the, I could play the horse in Kentucky today, and I could move it tomorrow, but I just can't run that horse. No, what I'm trying to say is, what is better for us in terms of keeping the horse here so we have these fields? If the horse is moving out of state, but they're out of jail earlier here, then does that help us or hurt us? Is what I'm getting to.
The 60-day rule would still stay in place. So, if we claim the horse today for $10,000, and we say we have this for the 20 days, we're not considered as jail rule. Jail rule is still in jail for 60 days.
Okay. So let's clarify this.
Yes.
Let's be really clear. Jail. All we're really talking about is the rate, the 25%. That's the only thing. You're not,
You're still in jail at the racetrack, you cannot move the horse off the ground for 60 days, and all you have is a 25 days.
You use the word jail, which is like...
okay, so to be clear, this is strictly a financial issue, not a location issue. Okay.
And you cannot transfer the horse, I'm assuming, for the 30 days.
Okay.
So that 60 days was the track rule,
Right.
and it still is.
On track,
On,
but not the thing you raise, but the raise. We're talking about the raise.
Okay, other
Thanks, Mike.
questions, comments?
In conjunction with that rule change, currently, all starter handicaps are considered non-claims or allowance races. So to raise the horse 25%, you enter into a starter handicap, you principal. However, starter allowances are a different story. So the rule, I'll refer you to a copy of 165.254, where it states that when a claim raises section does not apply to starter handicap, in which the weight to be carried is signed by the handicapper. And that would relate also to the starter allowances, which now means that if you claim a horse and you run a starter allowance, you're permitted to do that. That's just a simple change. I think it's warranted other than consider that old.
Councils?
no review.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, David, welcome. Thank you. Mike, thanks for your presentation. We'll take it under advisement. Thank you.
Welcome to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, thank you.
The next item on the agenda will be the USDA medication recommendation for clenbuterol and betamethasone threshold levels. Mr. Beagle. Just for informational purposes, prior to the last meeting, the USDA, the Harness Racing Medication Collaborative under the U.S. Trotting Association, submitted a letter to this commission. We distributed it at the last meeting. There's a request to modify clenbuterol and modify betamethasone. There were 5 letters, I think, sent. One originally was from the USDA, 2 letters from our side, a letter from the USDA responding to the our side letters, and a letter from Dr. Robinson. So, Mr. Beagle and Mr. Hankins, you're on.
I have a letter from the president of the USDA, Russell Williams. He couldn't be with us today, but he would like me to read this. The harness racing medication is a collaborative letter that has been presented to the commission. It can be summarized as follows. The only medication issue in our size letter had to do with clenbuterol. The HRMC letter explains why we believe that all issues surrounding this medication have been addressed. We remain ready to follow up on any questions. The rest of our size letter, in essence, had to do with who represents the standardbred industry regarding the scientific foundation of medication and standardbred racing. Our side is not the standardbred industry's representative on these matters. We assert our right to communicate independently with the regulators. The record shows that we have taken concrete steps to make our communications helpful, reliable, and appropriate to our racing group. One final observation is in order. Let's not lose sight of the good side of the therapeutic medication. Clenbuterol is a therapeutic medication, meaning that it is good for horses when administered by veterinarians. The regulators have a duty to protect the integrity of racing, and we fully support that. We ask that the regulators also keep in mind the welfare of the horse, which can draw important support from therapeutic medications that are properly administered. Thank you for your attention to our position papers. We respectfully ask you to adopt our stated recommendations.
Thank you. Kim, anything? Okay. Commissioners, any questions or comments? Okay, guys, thank you very much. Don't go anywhere, because you're back on the docket again. I'll tee this up again. Earlier in the week, Kim had called me and requested that this issue, the MSOA and the PHHA, had requested the Commission to take a look at the 2-year-old LASIK rule modification. Currently, under the standardbreds, 2-year-olds are not permitted LASIKs, and I suggested Kim or Sam come and make their presentation or position known to the Commission on the LASIK issue. Again, Mr. Beagle?
One area where Pennsylvania's medication rules lag behind other jurisdictions as the administration of Lacey's to 2 years. To the best of my recollection, the Commission's decision regarding this matter dates back approximately 25 years. To put that in perspective, back then off-track wagering and bone betting were in their infancy, and racinos weren't even in our vocabulary. The racing landscape has changed greatly since then. Pennsylvania is one of the few states that has not updated its regulations to allow LASIKs in 2-year-olds. For example, Delaware, Illinois, Minnesota all allow it. Ohio has no age-related restrictions at all for pre-race medications. The fact is, only a minority of 2-year-olds require LASIKs. However, since we have this effective and safe treatment, why not make it available as in other states? Continuing to restrict the use of LASIKs puts owners at a real disadvantage in an era where 2-year-olds can compete for significant money.
Thank you. Commissioners, comments, questions?
Tom, this is a clarification. We recently allowed this in thoroughbreds, is that correct?
That's correct. This is strictly a harness issue.
I know that, but we did
Correct.
recently allow it in 2-year-old thoroughbreds.
Correct.
We would like to mirror that legislation.
Sam, would you do me a favor? Can you give me a copy of both of those letters you read? I'd appreciate it. Or you can send it to me later. So that's. Thank you again. I'm sorry.
Tim and Sam, I'd like to thank you for your presentations. I would like to request that we delay a decision on both subjects until a later meeting.
Okay. That's fine.
Thank you for
Great.
your time.
Sam, Kim, thank you. Okay, to new business, Tom, want to go to the schedule, simulcast?
New business. Let's take A and B together. A is a motion to approve simulcast calendars for January for the harness tracks, Harris, Mohican Sun, and the Meadows. And B is a motion to approve the simulcast calendar for the thoroughbreds, Parks, Penn, and Presque Isle. Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I need a motion to adopt both of those.
Okay, thank you, Tom. We have a motion to accept A and B as presented on the agenda. Dr. Sweeney on the motion. Second, Tom Ellis on the motion. Second, discussion. Hearing none of those in favor of accepting A and B as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Abstentions, motion carries. Thank you.
Number C, motion to approve amended 2019 racing calendar from Penn at 172 days. If you remember, at the last meeting, Penn National submitted a request for 227 days. It's my understanding that the track and the horsemen have come together and agreed on 172 days. Eric, Todd, is that correct?
Correct, that's correct. You should have received a letter stating that.
All right. Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I need a motion to that effect.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion on item C. Motion, please. Mr. Ellis on the motion. Mr. Reddy on the second. Discussion of item C. Hearing none of those in favor of accepting the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you.
There are no ratifications, no new regulations. Moving on to licensing adjudications, no licensing matters. Under old business, out-of-competition testing, there were 10 out-of-competition tests done since the last meeting. We will probably end up in the neighborhood of 425 to 450 as on an annual basis, which is up about.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? When you give the out-of-competition testing on a monthly basis, you give the number but not the location for the track. Is that principle?
Going forward, I'll be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, general reports. Thanks.
Under general reports, let's start in the last meeting. I believe Todd and Stu advised the commission that they were formulating a how-to wager video, and the commission's permission, they'd like to show it. It's not too long. It'll be on the monitor behind it.
Is this on blackjack?
Actually, we have two videos for you. First is the aforementioned How to Bet video. It's for neophytes, first time to go to the racetrack. Sometimes it can be daunting to place that first wager. We intend to run this in-house. We've also had discussions about potential kiosk as we expand and maybe do some other things. This is a very basic How to Bet video. We could expand into exotics and things like that, but we wanted to start here. We'll also put this up on our website.
What's up? I'm Gordon.
And I'm Maggie.
And for the next few minutes, we're going to talk to you about something very simple.
But something that kind of freaks people out a little bit.
How to place a bet. One of the great things about horse racing, this is not a passive sport, okay? It's participatory. You gotta get involved. Place a bet. Place a couple of bets. Put your money where your mouth is.
One problem though, and we totally get this. For many of you, particularly in our age group, it's a bit overwhelming.
Remember how confused poor Marge Simpson was at the betting window?
Oh, can't I just bet that all the horses will have a good time?
Well, the horses are having a good time, and we want you to have a good time too.
And once you know how to place a bet, you're going to have a lot more fun here at the races. The simplest type of bet is win, place, or show.
Again, it's as simple as can be. When you bet a horse to win, that horse has to, think about it now, win. If your horse wins, you win.
Place means you collect money if your horse finishes first or second. And you win a show bet if your horse finishes first, second, or third.
If you're a beginner, if this is one of your first times at the track, just stick with that.
Now, how do you know how much you'll be getting back? Check the odds.
So your horse is quarter long, and you bet $2 on it, and he wins. You get back $10. 4 to 1 times the $2 you bet. So 4 times 2 is, don't use your fingers, 8. Plus you get back your original $2. 8 plus 2, you give me $10. There are all sorts of other bets you can make.
But wait until you're comfortable with win, place, and show before trying any of these other bets.
Okay, so how do I make a bet? Relax, you've got this. The clerk at the window needs to know what track you're playing, what race you're playing, how much you're betting, what type of bet, and don't forget, what horse.
That sounds like a lot of information, but it couldn't be simpler.
Penn National, race 1. $2 win, $2 place, number 4.
That's it?
Yep, that's it. And that's all there is to it. So whether you're doing a little handicapping or just playing your favorite number, go right up to the window and make a few bets.
Now that you know how easy it is, get involved. It's fun no matter what, and it's pretty awesome when you win.
It sure is, because you get to go back to the window and collect your winnings. Thanks for watching, you guys. See ya.
Bye.
In association with Keystone Films, this has been a production of the Pennsylvania HBVA.
So you can see we target that to the neophytes the first time come to the racetrack. It's not as intimidating as it looks. Like I said, we want to put that up on our website. We may have kiosks within the racetrack. We may put a YouTube address up there because, as you know, millennials are accessing different devices, and if they can look at that on their phone, feel comfortable in their seat, and maybe they'll approach the window. So this is just the beginning of that we'll try to expand on a number of issues trying to get younger people to the racetrack. Any questions on the production? Sal? Nope. Okay. We also have another production. This has to do with care that the horses receive. The idea behind this was, from a horse racing standpoint, for people to really understand the care and dedication that is given to these horses. We firmly believe that as certain groups that have eradicated other sports, for instance, greyhound racing, there's a misunderstanding of exactly the level of care that these horses have. So we had approached Dr. Patty Hogan, who is a huge supporter of not only horse racing, but aftercare programs, and she was kind enough to donate her time for this spot that we felt is another message that needs to get out there.
As a veterinarian, I got to be hands-on with race horses.
going to realize how much attention, how much love, and how much care they receive. It really is extraordinary. These animals are our livelihood. We depend on them, and they depend on us. Every day, at every racetrack, at every farm. Nothing is more important than the health and the well-being of these horses. Horse racing in Pennsylvania, it's a winner.
Just a quick perspective spot. Yeah, she's I hear conversations over. She's a pretty amazing individual. She's actually donated and done surgeries for our New Start program. I'm sure she's done the same for Mike's Turning for Homes program. But she's a huge advocate for the industry, and we wanted to make sure that it was recognized in the video.
Where are you going to distribute that? Is that
Yet to be decided.
Yeah.
We'll put it everywhere we can. We've done some geofencing under Steve's direction. We're going to try to get it out there wherever we can, in addition to what our outlets are as far as our website or social media. But that'll go everywhere. The more places we send it, and the better we're all going to be from the standpoint of that message.
I just want to say that Tyler's correct about Dr. Hogan and her support of the horse racing industry and our aftercare program. And she was recently inducted into the Parks Hall of Fame at the same time. She's also now a member of our Parks Hall of Fame for her services to the industry.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you. Other questions on the how to bet or the animal care? Very nice. Thanks.
Mike, did you have anything else? Did you not? Kim? Sam? Brian?
Good afternoon. You've received the new Pennsylvania Stallion Directory. I passed out a copy of that. This directory lists not only the stallions that stand in Pennsylvania, but the boarding farms that take in mares during the breeding and the foaling process. We want to make sure that everyone knows if they're bringing a mare into Pennsylvania, it isn't necessarily here already. They have a place to put that mare, and it helps out also the economy. We have 8 new stallions in this directory. Most of those stallions are graded winners. A lot of them grade 1 winners. Again, one of the things that was said was, well, I'd like to breed in Pennsylvania, but other than Jumpstart, there's not a whole lot there. And so now there are some viable stallions here in Pennsylvania for those that breed too. Any questions on the directory? You can look this up too on pabred.com. There's a copy of it there on pabred.com.
Brian, if I could ask, so several of the ads have the dollar amount and then the abbreviation LFSN. What does that mean next to the
life?
What's that?
Got it. Okay. Right. So the fee's only paid when the foal is born and stands a nurse.
You can buy it different way.
Yeah. You can buy no guarantee also, but okay. Our stallion auction is coming up in January, toward the end of January, and I got back from Kentucky about a month or so ago, and I think we currently have about 90 or a little over 90 stallion seasons that people can purchase from our auction. On the first page, the money going into the breeding fund, you can see that with 1 month left to go, it's about $1.9 million, down over last year. We expect to make some of that up as the last year of 17, they made up most of the takeout because the budget went longer than projected. last year. So we don't have a whole lot to make up before we, move that number down. So, I expect it to go down somewhat. And our PA thoroughbred newsletter that goes out in the Mid-Atlantic Thoroughbred, a copy of our 4 pages is in there with opportunity coming to Northview, PA. Opportunity was a horse that multiple grade 1 winner that was trained by Bob Baffert for a couple of years, and this horse made almost a little less than $5 million. I think it was $4.7 million. So a great addition to the roster of Pennsylvania. Any questions?
I'm just asking for benefit, just the status of the foal crop. I mean, changes over the last couple of years. What any insight on projections?
The Mayor's Bred report was up both this year and last year. It was up approximately 19% in 2017. It was up approximately between 8 and 9% in 18 on top of that 19% increase. This year, the 19 Mayor's Bred, I think, is going to be going to go in that same direction, in that upward direction. The live foal report, as I said, 17's Mayor's Bred was up about 19%. The live foal report was up about 29%. So remember, the Mayor's Bred report is only from Pennsylvania stallions. Live foal, report, again, up 29%.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Brian? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there are no public comments at this time. I think that I believe that takes care of all the horsemen's groups and breeders.
Okay. Thank you. Any other business before the commission? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor, we have a motion to adjourn. Yep. Second, everybody said yes. Okay, happy holidays, folks. Good to see you. Towards the end of January. Thank you.